I would now like to present the authors of the report, as well as our panelists for today. So the authors of our report are Craig Lamb, who is a co-director of Shift Insights, a research organization focused on innovation and technology policy. Prior to Shift, Craig worked as a senior policy advisor with the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, where he wrote extensively about technology, changing skills demands, and preparing firms and workers for a changing economy. Dr. Daniel Monroe is a senior fellow, teacher, and the director of policy projects in the Innovation Policy Lab at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, researcher in residence at Actua, and co-director of Shift Insights. Previously, he was a research fellow at the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and associate director of public policy at the Conference Board of Canada. Our panelists today are Anthony Mantioni, who is the Acting Director of Research for the Labour Market Information Council. His research examines issues related to the skills needs of the Canadian labour market. This includes identifying and measuring labour and skills shortages, exploring new technologies for skills classification, and consulting with stakeholders. Dr. Karen Myers is the president and CEO of Blueprint, a research organization dedicated to improving social and economic well-being by working together with its partners to solve complex policy challenges. Prior to founding Blueprint, Karen was the research director at the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation. Anthony, if you'd like to share your thoughts on what you've just heard.
Yeah, absolutely. First, let me start by saying thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I think this is great work. Getting better clarity on the skill needs of the job market and insight into the skill supply. In this case, asking interns about the skills they use, their level of confidence they have with respect to specific skills. It's an important step in general that I think will go a long way in helping us to inform decisions and finding solutions to addressing the skills-related issues that we have in Canada. In reading the report and hearing Daniel and Craig's presentation this afternoon, I had two thoughts or two reactions I'd like to share with the group. First, I thought that splitting the innovation process into stages and then exploring the specific skills needed at each stage was innovative. Seriously, though, it was a very creative idea because we tend to observe a lot of startup activity in Canada, but not necessarily scale-up activity. Funding instruments exist to encourage startups, and this obviously requires a certain skill set and a significant amount of innovation. But what about growth? Having this breakdown of skills needed at different phases or different stages of the innovation process, as well as according to different types of innovation, I think is a really great way of starting to tackle that question about growth and scaling up and how we might address the somewhat sluggish scale-up activity that we have seen. Second, the insights and skill complementarity is something else that really resonated with my own experiences because I really believe that it's a blend of technical skills and social emotional skills that are really critical to success in the world of work today.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony, for sharing those thoughts. I'll turn it over to Karen now.
Right. Well, I will also start by saying thank you for inviting me. It's really a delight to be part of this panel and to have had the opportunity to read the paper, listen to the presentation, and think deeply about the work. I also was really struck by the categorization and differentiation around type, stage, and activity of innovation. I also agree that it is an innovation, and one that I think can be particularly helpful in the social sector in Canada. We pour so much money into early stage pilots and virtually nothing, relatively speaking, into scaling up interventions. And Blueprint, as part of our role with the Future Skills Center, has had an opportunity to work with some promising interventions to help them take the next step in a scaling journey. And one of the things we are finding is that no one really knows what that means or what the skill sets are that are required for that. So it's now striking me that maybe we can actually take a look at the findings, like the framework and the lenses of this paper, and then the findings related to those, that then there might actually be some insights that we can glean and to think like, what does the innovation pipeline look like? What was also interesting, I take it that there was an indexing on STEM-like types of innovation, but maybe there's a way to also think about through if we were emphasizing the social sector, would those skill sets be similar or different? So that would be something I would be interested to hear your thoughts on. So that was sort of the first thing that struck me. Then I also thought about it through the lens of our own organization. So as an employer and an employer who is often hiring young people right out of graduate school. So we have about 60 people in our organization, and most of our new hires are young people. So not too far from the intern stage. And so I was thinking, like, we consider ourselves to be an innovation organization. We've got some pans in all parts of the innovation fire. We've got some things that it's really early stage around problem definition. We've got some things that we are thinking about that we might be ready to think about a product market strategy. So, I'm going to use that lens for how we think about our own work. But when I think about, like, what do I want most from new hires? For me, growth mindset and the ability to grapple with uncertainty are like top of the list, right? So when we're hiring young people and there's an incentive system in the post-secondary system around like getting good grades, and I see this with my own daughter as well too. And so if people are chasing the right answer, you need a high degree of certainty, right, to land that A+. And that's not by definition what innovation is. And so I was curious if that was like sort of how to factor. Also interesting to hear that social and emotional didn't resonate. It doesn't resonate with me either. So like the notion of human skills or complementary skills, I think that is promising. But I was looking for like a crosswalk to something like growth mindset or uncertainty. So I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Excellent. Thanks to both of you for sharing those insights. I will turn it over to Dan and Craig and see if they'd like to just comment on what's been shared so far.
I think Karen, to your point, not necessarily a crosswalk, but this is the beauty of this kind of ongoing rolling research, in that we can adjust the questions that we ask in certain ways, because as Dan pointed out earlier, this is sort of a first iteration. We're just trying to get a sense of whether or not things resonate, whether or not the actual structure of our questions makes sense. And most of it did, but I think adding some more things around, like growth, and as everyone's pointing out too, the focus on so we only really captured organizations working at kind of the earlier stages of innovation. So it'd be really interesting if we can try and simultaneously look at organizations that are at the more implementation growth stages, and then also kind of look at different skill sets around growth and how do we even ask those questions, I think would be really fascinating, and whether or not they resonate again would be really cool. So yeah, I'd love to talk more about that.
Yeah, to add something to what Craig is saying, and I think both Anthony and Karen, you sort of highlighted something that I think we were aware of, but not able to articulate until we heard you articulate it, which is essentially, so our research and the way that the survey is designed prompts the firms and the interns to think about innovation projects. Right. So like the project is the unit of analysis. What are the skills required for this innovation project? But what you'd like to hear, and what we'd love to sort of figure out, I think there's data in there to actually unpack this, is, and not so much what are the skills required for the different stages within those projects, but what are the different skills required for different stages of a company growth, right? So, it's like startup to maturing to, a well-matured organization, a larger organization. We didn't do that analysis, but I think because there are questions in there that ask about firm age, size, and that kind of thing, we might be able to tease out some things. So I think that's so that unit of analysis, I think, is a really important one. On the question of, how do we better understand the importance of and how we develop growth mindsets and this ability to grapple with uncertainty? I love that question as well, right? As Craig knows, when I first came to the Monk School like 5 years ago, the one thing that I really wanted to do was study uncertainty across a variety of different. And what is it? Like, how do we actually think about uncertainty? And I had these grand ambitions to sort of write a book about uncertainty.
Yeah, weren't you going to write a book about that?
We're going to. It's uncertain. We're still thinking about it. The thing that stumped me was trying to figure out how to measure that phenomenon, or how do you actually measure a capacity to wrestle with uncertainty, right? So it's like one of these like really interesting questions, really important issues. Like, we know it's important. We know that innovation involves a lot of uncertainty. We want people to be able to, have the skills in order to understand and manage that kind of thing. How do we ask about that on a survey? I'm still not sure how you do that. But it's nice to be reminded that there's this research question we haven't figured out yet.
I think we should tap Karen after this to figure that out. It's just Dan and I that work together.
And everybody, yeah.
Daniel, I'd like to just jump in and maybe add one more thing to that uncertainty piece, which is resilience. This is something that, comes up a lot, I think, in the career development professionals who, as an organization, we work very closely with. And it kind of, I think, fits nicely with that piece of uncertainty. So from the career development professional perspective or career development world, a focus is on preparing job seekers from various ages and different transition points in their lives, right, to dealing with uncertainty in the job market. So we saw a very big unpredictable event with COVID-19 and the impacts that it had for people in the job market. But how do they deal with that uncertainty? And I know resilience is a big piece of that in terms of maybe coping mechanisms and strategies. And so if this is an area that you do go down and you're, as you said, you're looking into potentially writing a book, I would say this is definitely a really interesting piece to look into, as well as that kind of resiliency aspect.
Yeah, I'll jump in there and say, so Dan, that was the distinction I was trying to put my finger on, is like skills for innovation projects versus skills to work in an innovation environment, right? Mm-hmm. And that ability, that growth mindset, that belief that intelligence and success are not fixed things. They're actually things that you can change. And it's not just time and energy. Those are part of it. But it's also that willingness to embrace challenges, embrace obstacles. And Anthony, I think that's your point to resilience as well, too. Most importantly, to be able to learn, right? And especially learn from failure. And I'm thinking of all of the young people who might be part of this webinar, and thinking like it's so important when you're young to be able to think about that. And the world of work is rapidly changing. We're facing uncertainty in a way that school just doesn't prepare us for. And if your goal is to work in an organization that is an innovation organization, that's going to be even more important. I think there's an intersection as well to that notion about the gap between people's confidence and people's use of skills. And I agree with the glass is half full part of that analysis. We would not expect young people to feel super confident about a set of very complex skills. But I think what the trick will be is, how do we help young people leverage that self-doubt into learning and increased performance. We don't want that self-doubt to be paralyzing. We want people to have confidence in their ability to learn and discover and grow. But we don't want people to be overconfident and arrogant and especially wedded to their opinions, right? Like we want that to be loose for people and for there to be room and space to learn and grow and to embrace that. So Adam Grant calls that confident humility. And I think that is like the critical success factor and how I see young people like grow in their careers. If you can find that spot, there's like that sweet spot between being humble, but you don't want to be like paralyzed by self-doubt. But you need to be open.
And I'm glad you say that because Craig and I, we did wrestle with this, these findings at first, right? This apparent gap or difference. This isn't quite the right word, but the difference between the frequency of use versus the self-reported confidence, right? We wrestled for a while, like, well, what do we make of this, right? And we knew that like the knee-jerk reaction, the initial reaction would be, there's a gap that needs to be filled. And while there's certainly some signals there about, where can we, adjust curricula, courses, programs, and other things to improve confidence in these things so that, it gets closer to how often graduate students and future workers deal with them. But, like, as you say, batting it back and forth a little bit, we thought it's actually good that they're not overconfident, right? And so I like this notion of confident humility, right? That is confidence in one's capacity to learn new things, but a humility about what one already knows and what one can know. One thing that we didn't do in this, and that would be interesting to do with the intern sample, is to unpack that a little bit by some of the demographic data that we have. So it would be interesting to see, our levels of self-reported confidence, do they differ by discipline, right? And I'm not even going to speculate. Like I actually have some hypotheses, but I'm not going to speculate out loud about which disciplines might exhibit greater confidence than others. There's probably gender differences as well, right? I mean, on a lot of other work that we've done, we know that especially among youth involved in sort of STEM kinds of things, that boys will express higher levels of confidence than girls, despite having the exact same level of actually, skill acquisition, right? So I think that's another thing we might try to unpack in the future as well. So I'm glad you noted that.
Excellent. Oh, sorry, Craig, were you about to say something?
No, you can go.
Okay, you look poised there. I don't want to cut you off.
I was just thinking. I've got some interesting new categories and structures and questions that I really want to add to this whole thing now.
Yeah, and if I may, I mean, so it's interesting, right? Mitacs has very rich data on a lot of our kind of internships and interns that are partnering with industry and getting more into the social innovation areas. And so just less rich data on that, but I really take your points, Karen, that, as we get more and more data and understanding of what kinds of skills in those sectors are needed, that's going to be equally important. And I think about, our role at Mitacs. And so I'm keen to ask you for your advice on how we can be most helpful, because of course, we are playing that intermediary role of helping students to have that kind of first experience or, second or third experience with a partner organization. So when you're talking about the skills that are needed and that are showing up as being needed more on that complementary side, some of that is, it's helping them to have the experience, but it's also just longer professional experience, if you will. So I will ask the question to all of you in terms of how can Mitacs and the support that we provide have the greatest impact on some of influencing some of these skills ourselves? And I know you had some on your slides, Dan, in terms of really focusing some criteria on what kinds of skills do you anticipate the students to be gaining through your project and that kind of thing. But I want to turn it over to maybe I'll start with Anthony and Karen, and then ask Dan and Craig to comment on that as well. So how can we be most impactful in this space?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to start. I would say maybe to caveat what I'm going to say, in that the work that we do as an organization that I'm involved in is less on the innovation side of it and more on what are we seeing with respect to skill demands by employers across Canada. And in particular, we are analyzing online job postings as one major data source for trying to understand this, which then we can pass on to organizations like Mitacs to hopefully then help communicate that right to the interns and to your various members. And I would say that this really comes back to that discussion that we were having on, again, skill complementarity and seeing the digital and technical skills blended with the social emotional skills as being some of the most important, I think, categories of skills, if you will. Technology obviously continues to be one of the main driving forces behind task changes that we're seeing with occupations. It's certainly the most widely analyzed of what we call megatrends, which are these large themes, I guess you could call them, driving the changes to the labor market today. And I'm aware of something like artificial intelligence, for example, which I'll use that to very loosely cover, knowledge, skill, ability, rather than, instead of kind of trying to distinguish and define skill versus other very closely related work requirements. But something like AI, for example, we're hearing a lot of it in the media, and we would expect jobs in perhaps the ICT sector to require skills or knowledge related to artificial intelligence, right? That wouldn't raise any heads to see it listed in job postings for data scientists, for example. But in the work that we're doing as an organization, analyzing work requirements that employers are listing in postings, we're seeing AI creep into other occupations that may not be as expected. For example, we're seeing postings for accounting clerks and real estate agents now call for AI as a work requirement in these postings. And not only are they increasing in occupations that beforehand we may not have seen this as a specific skill or knowledge area, the number of postings within those occupations is also growing. So actually, prior to our conversation today, I did a quick look through the data that we have. And for job postings for administrative officers, just within the last year, the number of postings increased by 38% that looked for artificial intelligence as a work requirement. So I definitely see digital and technical skills continuing to shape the future of work and the skill sets that I think Mitacs wants to communicate, let's say, to the people and to the partner organizations that you work with. And we see this even if we're looking at non-high-tech occupations. So I know that this particular report that was skewed towards, occupations in the STEM sector, STEM industries, but challenges that we're facing as a society, climate change, for example, they often have technical solutions, or at least technical components to their solutions. And so it really stands to reason that these digital and technical skills are going to be critical to success. And these are things that I would highlight to any person who's looking at skill development, skill training, and skill investment, whether it be new students entering the labor market, in training education now, or even people transitioning later in life. And then the communication portion of it, those social emotional skills, I think everything that Karen had highlighted before, I absolutely loved the conversation around uncertainty and growth mindset. For me, that's what I think of when I hear social emotional skills. And then that communication aspect as well, right? So everything that we do involves passing on information, communicating information, either in the form of a written report or even something as simple as giving directions to another person on how to carry out a job task, which is something that very likely to occur in the context of this report and study and the organizations that are working with interns. Clarity of expression is critical, right? And I think there used to be this mindset that certain occupations, even certain industries, didn't necessarily need very strong writing skills or very strong communication skills. And if that ever was true, it no longer is. I think, from personal experience, even in the work that I do, I work with a team of economists who are conducting a lot of research on issues related to the Canadian labor market. These are people with very strong data analysis skills, programming skills, statistical modeling skills. But those analyses, the insights obtained, they need to be communicated to an audience. And that might be in the form of a blog or a dashboard or an infographic. But regardless, knowing your audience's needs, their background knowledge, having some sort of grasp on even rhetorical strategies, it's just as important as that technical piece. And I think that's really what we're seeing, from the evidence of the job postings, some of these more technically oriented skills creeping into these maybe previously thought of as non-technical occupations or tasks. So to answer your question, I would say that I really think in terms of what can be done, it's targeting on this blend and preparing students and other job seekers to have a good basis of digital and technical skills, as well as communication skills and these other social emotional skills that were being spoken of just previously.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Anthony, for that. I'll turn it over to Karen.
Okay, so two things come to mind for me. I'll say one thing that I will take away and start doing differently, and I would be curious if this resonates for you at Mitacs as well too. When we think about our job descriptions, we often have the technical skills that we need to do data analysis, evidence generation, policy analysis, all related to the innovation work we do. And then we talk about what we might call the human skills, right? And we would talk about creativity and problem solving and collaboration in sort of that context. One thing that I'm going to explore doing differently is talking about them as complementary, innovation skills, and with more of an innovation lens and definition to them. So I think that's something that Mitacs, I would be interested to know, would you see value in exploring and actually defining them out, thinking about the competencies and behavior, so building them out a little bit as innovation skills, because they can kind of get squashed into just the softer skills kind of paradigm. But seeing how they differ in the context of different types and stages of innovation could build that out a little bit better, and that might be more concrete and more valuable. And then the second piece that I would say, I'll just double click on the point that I already made. What I say to my daughter when she comes home and tells me that she got a 95 or a 97 or 98, I tell her that is wonderful. I'm proud of you. As a reminder, I care more about your mindset and your habits than I do about your grades. Right? No one cares that you got a 98% out in the real world. And that sort of grade seeking behavior could be to your detriment, because you're only going to want to work on problems that you can fully understand and that you can be certain that you can. So don't limit yourself to grade seeking behavior. But I wonder if that's something that Mitacs can also, think about how to foster and build with the cohorts of graduate students that you work with.
Excellent. Thank you so much. If Dan and Craig, I don't know if you have some quick comments on that. I'd like to turn it over to our audience, who I'm sure are very eager to engage with the four of you in some good conversation. So just wanted to see if you had anything to add on this, and then we'll turn it over to the audience.
So really quickly, and I speak quickly. You said at the outset that we did a detailed presentation. It wasn't actually it wasn't detailed. It was kind of thin, but articulated very quickly. Okay, so quickly, I'm not being quick. I want to give you kind of, so one thing is obvious from the work about what Mitacs can do differently, right? And that is just a way of thinking about this stuff, making that distinction between the general skills that are required for everyone involved in innovation. And so, to the extent that you have learning modules that help to develop these skills, or strategies to help interns reflect on their development of, you know, certain general skills, like the data skills, like the social emotional skills, that kind of stuff. So that's important. The hard work is then developing or possibly developing a suite of programs and curricula that get to those specialized skills, right? And targeting those to people who will go into different areas, right? So there's kind of, you know, the general skill stuff and the specialized skills. But last point, but let me give you this annoyingly researchery answer to this, which is to say, I actually don't know what to recommend yet, right? Because there's actually a big gap in our research. Now, fortunately, like this is an iterative thing, we'll keep going, but there's a big gap. And that is, while we asked firms and interns what skills they used, you know, what skills are important, how confident, and that kind of thing, we haven't actually lined those up with measures of innovation success yet, right? We don't know what sets of skills are associated with higher patenting rates or higher R&D spending or, you know, successful releases of products in the market. So we have like this rich sort of set of reflections on what they use and what they think are important, but we actually don't know what that means in terms of success yet. So that's a future thing. So I wouldn't want to give like super concrete recommendations until we do that part of things. What an annoyingly researchery answer, right? More research required.
Okay, that's all right. That's what we're all about here.
Anne-Marie, is there time to just add an additional comment?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so it was something that Karen was talking about with the grade-seeking behavior piece that really resonated with me because in another life, I also worked as a classroom teacher at secondary level. And so education in particular is something that I'm very passionate about. And in thinking about changes that we might make, or these conversations that we might start to have here, leveraging best practices when it comes to teaching and training, I think, it seems like a no-brainer, but we have years and years of data from studies into learning theory conducted by cognitive psychologists, neuroscientists, yet these findings are not incorporated into the actual practice of teaching, from the K through 12 and even in the post-secondary levels. And the way that we look at assessments, for example, they're conducted in a way that creates this sort of grade-seeking behavior in a way, right? So I think there's changes that have to occur at that level, but then also in the organizational side of things too, right? And I was thinking about behaviors, and there's organizational policies that might impact skill development. So if you have the ear of firms, talking with them and suggesting that they might review their policies and how these might impact skill development by either encouraging or discouraging skill use might be something else to consider. The report highlights, for example, importance of skills like risk-taking and judgment to innovation. And there are strong organizational components to this as well, right? I mean, if we think about an organizational there's a responsibility to create a work climate that's conducive to risk-taking and conducive to exercising judgment. Policies that might penalize employees for taking chances and failing because of performance pay, schemes, et cetera. These potentially could discourage workers from taking risks. So again, just kind of that lens of reviewing what policies and processes might exist that may either encourage or discourage skill development and then even skill exercise.
Thanks for that, Anthony. Very, very, very good points. It gets integrated into us at quite a young age. So really, you're pointing to some systemic changes that are needed, and that's a very important contribution and statement. I will turn it over to our audience, as I know that they are keenly awaiting. So I'm going to ask Kim or Jeff to remind me. I think that people are able to kind of come on and ask questions directly live, or are we really asking them to put them in a chat?
So they can definitely respond live or ask questions live. If not, if we don't have anyone that wants to pose their question, live to the group, I can go through a number of questions. We've received some very interesting ones, actually. So if I missed any of the panel discussion, I'm sorry. I was furiously typing responses to people. So I'll try not to ask questions that go over what we were talking before. Yeah, so maybe let's give everyone a chance to. You can put up your hand, and Kim can loop you in if you want to ask a question. If not, I'll just pose the questions.
Jeff,
Okay,
you've been answering questions on the fly? That's,
Yeah, sorry.
That's amazing. I'm just looking at this answered question. Nicely done.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, sorry if I missed some of your insights there, Dan. I was responding to these things as we went. But there's some really interesting ones here. I think maybe let's start with this question about I guess like the research design. Like, would we expect different results if we were looking at full-time employees versus interns? Like in this particular case?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Greg.
I'm just gonna ask a point of clarification. In what sense? Like, for what results are we focused on?
Like, would we see different skill needs on the side of the employer? Would they identify maybe communication, teamwork skills more with a full-time employee versus an intern?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think we even started to tease that kind of dynamic out with the different skills for different members of the team. And I think that kind of just highlighted the fact that depending on where you are within the team or what your role is, like we even saw like a clear category of like sales and marketing people. So we know that kind of in a team, there's probably like a sales and marketing group. There's like more managerial oriented people, and then just like general people working on the project. But yeah, I think we would see for sure, depending on what was the focus of like who we were asking the questions about, whether it was an intern or a full-time employee, and what kind of role they were occupying within any of these teams. Like, I think 100% we would see different skills needs. So I think that's interesting. And I think, like, given the way that the survey works, it's hard to kind of ask them about other members of the team. But it'd be really cool to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it gets back to this. It gets back to this this distinction between innovation projects and firms, right? Like, the survey itself prompts the firms and the interns to focus on the innovation project they just worked on, right? So if you ask a firm, did you require HR skills for the innovation project? I mean, I'm sure almost none of them are going to say yes. But if you were to ask them, are HR skills necessary for running your operation and growing it? They're going to say absolutely yes, right? So that unit of analysis probably hides some really important organization level skills because we take that innovation project lens to this thing.
I wonder if we're able to kind of somehow differentiate between those, because as Karen was talking earlier, I was like, oh my God, we got another differentiation point. We got a skill, or we got kinds of innovation stage and project versus organization, which is awesome. But I wonder if there was I haven't thought of the mechanics of doing it, but if we were able to differentiate how skills would differ, or the skills required would differ, like the way that the employers are thinking about it. I don't know. I guess we'd have to ask the question.
I have a list of future research activities that we have to do, Craig.
Yeah, me too. Mine are probably worse than yours, but I'll see what you got.
Did anyone else want to respond to that particular question regarding interns versus full-time employees, and whether there might be a difference in the findings there? If not, I can move on. Okay, I'll move to the next one. Yeah, so there were some really interesting questions. Actually went outside of particularly skills. It related more to like organizational culture. Like, did we look at whether these employers or organizations are kind of providing the workplace environment necessary for these skill sets to actually be developed and to actually work.
Did we look at that? No. That's the short answer, right? Should we? Probably. Again, it's sort of like a logistics thing, given the nature of how we're collecting insights. But I think just a general point is, I think buried in that question, and maybe it's in the head of whoever was asking us. There is this important distinction between what we can do for individuals by way of teaching them and what firms need, and the background structures that they face in doing this kind of stuff, right? And we don't ask about any of the background structures. We obviously ought to do that, right? And so social and emotional skills is one of these examples. We say to a certain degree, it looks like individuals should, develop certain social and emotional skills, right? Although we don't necessarily call them that. So like take tolerance, for example, right? You should develop tolerance skills, but what that means will differ in the different organizations in which it's operating. And we know that some organizations are going to value that more than others, but in fact, all of them should value that, right? Yeah. So there's this sort of lack of a critical lens for organizational culture buried into this. So the short answer is no, but it's an important thing to look at.
Yeah, that was.
Sorry,
Greg. No, Greg, you respond.
Jeff, you go.
No, go.
Just joking. Well, I've heard multiple times, and I think it's critical for us to incorporate this both on the individual intern level with questions and on the organizational level, kind of getting a better sense of discipline, more just kind of general demographic, like what are they working on? What are they doing? What kind of company is this? If we could get a better sense of that, I think it'd be also really interesting.
Yeah, that relates to a question that Sarah put forward about like our sample. I think like earlier you did say that it was primarily looking at individuals from STEM disciplines, so that does skew the results. I was wondering, do you think the results would change significantly if we had an equal number of individuals from social sciences and humanities?
I don't know.
That's the next round. That's the next round of data collection.
You know what? I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think you have a different sample with different emphases. You're probably going to see some different emphases. To what extent will the general skills that are identified shift? I think there's at least a foundation of some that are probably relatively stable. Others that may vary depending on what sample you have. I think the thing that, like one of the important things that Craig and I were trying to do with this is like we recognize right from the start that the sample was going to be skewed, that the sample was skewed, right? We recognize that. So that's why I didn't spend a whole lot of time on that first chart and said, what are the categories of skills that firms say are important? Because we know that they're mostly STEM-oriented firms, mostly STEM-oriented individuals. But despite the skew in the total sample, it's when we begin to unpack things at that innovation type, stage, and activity level that stuff matters less, right? So it's like at that point, we know we're talking about technology development, right? So we actually want a skewed, we want a lot of tech developers to understand what goes on there. When we look at, service innovation, right? So we actually want to look at service innovation people. We unpack what they are doing. So I think that the general thing is we'd love a bigger sample so that we could do more of those deep dives by kinds of firms and kinds of disciplines involved. And probably see some differences, but we're aware of it. And I don't think it messes up too much what we've done. And we're look at the report. We're pretty transparent about it.
Yeah, I would just jump in and emphasize that you can only have so many sources of variation. So by looking at STEM and then looking for variation within STEM, right? That allows you to take that deeper lens and explore that variation within. If you had all of the different types of all the different disciplines, right, you would probably find just noise, right? That you got to hold something constant in your analysis and then explore variation within that. So it would be like a question of if you were to replicate that analysis in a different disciplinary focus. But yeah, you've got probably the maximum amount of variability that you could hold within one analysis, I think, right? Like, because you've got the different type stages and activities, and then go discipline by discipline for that.
That's
Thanks so
definitely
much. Yeah, I think there's really only one more question. And I think it relates to some of the discussion on the panel about the importance of those complementary skills, particularly like the social emotional ones. And a lot of our partner firms in this case, maybe not recognizing the importance of them. And I think that's true across the board. I think that is true just in Canada, in North America. Like, what would it take to kind of bring the business community along on this idea that those skills are critical and that they should be sourcing for them quite early on?
So I'll tell you in the next iteration of research. So it's kind of a cheesy answer, but okay, a couple things, right? One is that, and I've said this before, and I think Craig as well, I think we believe that these social and emotional skills are important, but what we believe as researchers doesn't matter, right? What matters is what we can show. And in this iteration of the research, we haven't been able to, we actually didn't even try to unpack that, right? What does it mean to show that these are important? Well, I mean, there are a variety of ways to do this. One, if we're taking the innovation project lens, we want to see whether social and emotional skills, and get into the specific ones, not the category, whether the use of these makes a difference to a set of innovation project outcomes. From the firm lens, we didn't incorporate in this, but we could in the future, right? To what extent do the social and emotional skills make a difference to firm level performance, right? So again, and I can't, this is one point that I really want to be clear about. I believe that they're important, and I know that Craig believes that they're important, but it doesn't matter what we believe. It only matters what we can show, and we haven't been able. We haven't looked at that carefully yet.
Can I say something as well? I'd like to add that. So obviously, it's not research based, but just experientially, as somebody who works in management and leads teams and leads people, I would say that I really see this division of work into like people and processes. And whenever there's projects that go off the rails, it's always the people component that is the hardest to address. Processes can be taught. I can teach processes to the team, steps. But that people component I find to be the most difficult. And, as somebody who works for an organization that employs other people, that's something that we really value and we look for. So to your question in terms of how can we communicate that to other organizations, other employers, I think conversations like this is a good place to start, right? I mean, obviously we have audience members who are interested in the research already, self-selecting into the audience. So maybe a little selection bias, but I think having these types of conversations is a great starting point.
This is a little off topic, but Anthony, I'm always curious when I was hearing about the job postings analysis. I'm always curious about when asking about different like non-technical skills, whatever non-technical skills, the assessment of those is so much more difficult, and trying to obviously I'm gonna on an application say that an incredible team, me, but who knows? Ask Dan. I always find that piece really interesting. How are they assessed, and how are they, or even, I guess just assessed.
It's a good point, and it's one that I think we're seeing more job assessments associated with occupations. I know that occupations posted with Indeed, for example, employers have the option to choose from various assessments, from behavioral assessments that ask those, was it situational judgment tests, SJTs, I believe, and then, from some of the more technical pieces. But I think psychometric testing, is a whole other can of worms. And we start looking at, how do we assess behavioral qualities and judgment, critical thinking, these types of things on assessments it can be very challenging, right? So great question, very interesting too.
Excellent, thank you. Just checking in with Jeff to make sure there's not one last burning question. He's all good. All right. So I do want to take the time to thank you all so much for participating in today's event, both, of course, our audience members, and thank you to those who've stayed for the whole duration. I think this is a very exciting topic. We're certainly taking very important notes on this at Mitacs in terms of how this can influence future skills strategies, which will be an ongoing conversation. I want to thank Dan and Craig for being with us today and taking the time to share the findings of their report, as well as Anthony and Karen for dedicating their time to this important conversation and really rounding out the discussion with different perspectives. And finally, I want to thank Kim, who you do not see, but who is managing this event in the background. And I want to thank Jeff, Carrie from our policy team, who's been leading this project. And I know how keen he is also to see the insights being put into action. So thank you, Kim and Jeff. And I know that there's other Mitacs staff on the chat here. So thank you to all of you who've been involved in this project. So with that, I will close off and wish you all a lovely day and more conversation to come.